If this story has piqued your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The house had always been too big for just two people. Located in one of London's most upscale districts, the mansion had 3 floors, a garden that resembled a park and a swimming pool that reflected the sky like a perfect mirror. But all that immensity couldn't fill the void that took over the silent corridors, especially when Edward Alistair spent months travelling for work, leaving behind his 7-year-old son Michael in the care of a woman he deemed trustworthy. Edward was a respected businessman, owner of one of the country's largest construction companies. After losing his wife, Helen, 3 years ago, in an accident that still hurt too much to remember, he threw himself into work as one throws oneself into a bottomless abyss. It was easier to sign contracts in Dubai, negotiate in New York, visit construction sites in Paris, than to face his son's gaze and see in him the reflection of the woman he loved. Michael had Helen's same brown eyes, the same shy smile, the same furrowed brow when he was confused. It was as if her memory was alive in that boy, and Edward didn't know how to cope with it. For this reason, he hired Veronica Benson. She had impeccable references, years of experience with children, an elegant demeanor, and an always precise discourse. She spoke about pedagogy with authority, cited foreign educational methods, and promised discipline and structure. Edward believed he was doing what was best for his son. After all, Veronica seemed to be everything Michael needed, someone present, responsible, capable of filling the absence of both him and his mother. But what Edward didn't know was that as soon as the mansion door closed and he embarked on another international trip, Veronica took off her mask. The kind and helpful woman who smiled at him on the phone, who sent photos of the boy well-dressed and fed, who assured him that everything was under control, was just a facade. The real Veronica was someone who saw in Michael not a vulnerable child who needed affection, but a burden, an inconvenience, someone who should be molded, controlled, silenced. Michael learned early not to complain. He learned that crying meant being locked in the dark room for hours. He learned that asking for food outside mealtimes resulted in punishment. He learned that any mistake, no matter how small, was accompanied by icy glares, cutting words, and punishments that hurt more internally than externally. He tried to tell his father a few times, but Veronica was always nearby, supervising the calls, holding the phone, whispering threats softly, while Edward waited on the other end of the line. And so, the days dragged on. Michael woke up early, put on his uniform that was already too tight, ate the minimum Veronica allowed, and went to school with a heavy backpack and an even heavier heart. At school he was quiet, withdrawn, avoided his classmates, and spent recesses alone under a tree, drawing in an old notebook. The teachers noticed the change, but when they tried to talk, Michael lowered his head and said everything was fine. He was afraid of what would happen if he told the truth. Weeks turned into months. Edward continued traveling, accumulating contracts, expanding businesses, fleeing from the pain he couldn't face. Veronica continued manipulating the situation with mastery, maintaining impeccable appearances whenever necessary, and Michael continued to shrink, becoming thinner, quieter, more lost within his own home. Until on a rainy Tuesday in April, everything changed. Edward was in Edinburgh, finalizing the negotiation of a billion-dollar venture, when he felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't physical pain. It was a deep unease, a tightness he couldn't explain. During the meeting, he found himself thinking about Michael more than usual. When was the last time he truly talked to his son? When was the last time he hugged him? When was the last time he was truly present? The questions bothered him so much that very night he cancelled his subsequent commitments and bought a ticket back to London. He didn't notify Veronica. He didn't want to give her time to organize anything. He just grabbed his suitcase and left. He arrived at the mansion the next morning, with the sky still grey and a fine rain falling over the city. He paid the taxi, opened the gate with the key he always carried in his pocket, and entered. The house was strangely silent. No sound of television, no music, no voice. Just the heavy, dense suffocating silence. Edward dropped his suitcase in the entrance hall and walked slowly through the corridors. He called for Michael, but no one answered. He called for Veronica, and the silence continued. He went to the kitchen and saw that everything was too tidy, too clean, as if no one had used anything recently. He opened the refrigerator and found only a few expired yogurt pots and a bottle of water. Nothing that could feed a growing child. His heart began to beat faster. He went upstairs, past the second floor where the bedrooms were, and noticed that Michael's bedroom door was ajar. He peeked inside. The bed was made, but the duvet was old and faded. The shelves which once held toys were empty. The walls which Helen had lovingly painted were peeling. That was not the room of a loved boy. It was the room of someone forgotten. It was then that he heard it. A muffled, distant cry coming from somewhere above. Edward looked at the ceiling and realized the sound was coming from the attic. He never went up there. It was a storage space, full of old boxes, broken furniture, dusty memories. Why would Michael be there? He climbed the stairs leading to the third floor with his heart pounding. The attic door was open, and the grey morning light streamed in through a wide-open window. Veronica stood with her back to him, looking out with her arms crossed. She hadn't noticed his presence yet. Edward entered slowly, and that's when he saw. Outside the window, hanging by the metal gutter almost 10 meters high, was Michael. His small hands clutched the structure in desperation. His arms trembled with effort. His feet dangled in the air. The boy cried softly, pleading for Veronica to let him in, and she just watched, with a cold, almost bored expression, as if watching something trivial. Edward felt his blood run cold. For a second he couldn't move. Then fury, fear, and despair exploded within him all at once. He ran to the window, unceremoniously pushed Veronica aside, and extended his arms to his son. Michael, upon seeing his father, let out an even more desperate cry. "Daddy, please help me, I can't hold on anymore." Edward firmly held the boy's arms and pulled him inside with all his strength. Michael fell onto the attic floor, trembling, dirty, hurt. His hands were scratched, his fingers bled slightly, his clothes were torn. Edward immediately picked him up, pressing him against his chest as if to protect him from everything in the world. "It's all right now, son, it's all right. Daddy's here." But Michael wouldn't stop crying. He cried out of fear, relief, exhaustion. He cried because someone had finally come to save him. Edward looked at Veronica, who was still standing by the window, her expression unchanged. "What did you do to him?" She sighed, as if dealing with an inconvenience. "I was educating the boy, Edward. He needs to learn to obey, to be responsible. You're not here to do that, so someone has to." Edward felt his anger rise like lava. He stood up, still holding Michael in his arms, and stared at the woman he had trusted for so long. "You put my son out a window. You hung him 10 meters high. That's not education. That's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words died in his throat because he didn't want Michael to hear. He didn't want the boy to carry any more weight than he already was. Veronica crossed her arms and raised her chin. "You don't know what I've had to deal with all these months, Edward. You travel all the time, leave the boy here. Do you think it's easy to take care of a child alone? He's stubborn, disobedient, throws tantrums over everything. I had to be firm." "Firm?" Edward repeated the word with disbelief. "You called that being firm?" He went downstairs with Michael still in his arms, ignoring Veronica, who began to follow him, trying to justify her actions with an increasingly loud, increasingly desperate voice. But Edward didn't want to listen. He just wanted to protect his son, get him out of there, take him away from that house, from that woman, from that silent hell he himself had allowed to exist. Upon reaching the ground floor, Edward placed Michael on the living room sofa and knelt in front of him. He looked at the boy's face, and for the first time in a long time, truly looked. Michael's eyes were swollen from crying so much, his cheeks were hollow, his lips chapped. His hair was long and disheveled, his clothes were old and worn. How had he not noticed before? How had he been so blind? "Michael, tell me everything that happened. Please." The boy looked at his father with fear. He looked at Veronica, who was standing on the stairs, observing everything intently. Then he lowered his head and began to speak. Slowly, with a trembling voice, he told about the meals that were denied, about the punishments, about the constant fear, about the threats. He said that Veronica made him repeat rehearsed phrases whenever Edward called. He said she lied about everything. He said he tried to ask for help, but was too afraid of the consequences. Every word was a stab to Edward's heart. He listened to everything in silence, feeling guilt, anger, and pain mix within him. When Michael finished speaking, Edward hugged him again, this time with eyes full of tears he could no longer hold back. "I'm so sorry, son. I'm so very sorry. I should have been here. I should have noticed. I failed you." Michael hugged his father back, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. Veronica descended the rest of the stairs, trying to maintain her composure. "Edward, you're exaggerating. The boy is dramatic. He invents stories. I always took good care of him." Edward stood up, placing himself between Veronica and Michael. "Get out of my house now." She blinked, surprised. "How?" "Get out. You will never come near my son again. Never again." Veronica let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think it's that easy? Do you think you can just dismiss me and pretend nothing happened? I have rights, Edward. I've worked here for years. And what if I tell people the truth? What if I say you abandoned your son, that you were never present, that you're an absent and negligent father?" Edward took a step forward, his voice low and firm. "Do whatever you want, but get out of my house now before I call the police." Veronica looked at him for a long moment, realizing she had lost control of the situation. Then she picked up her purse from the table, cast a final resentful glance at Michael, and walked out the front door, slamming it shut. As soon as she was gone, Edward locked the door and returned to his son. Michael was still trembling, still scared, still trying to understand that it was all real, that the nightmare was finally over. Edward picked the boy up again and went up to his room. He gathered some clothes, some personal items, the drawing notebook Michael kept under his bed. Then he went downstairs, picked up his own suitcase that was still in the entrance hall, and put everything inside. "We're going to leave here for a few days, okay? We need a safe place away from all of this." Michael nodded, still silent, still processing. Edward took the car keys, put Michael in the back seat, locked the mansion, and drove through the city without a definite destination. He needed time to think, to plan, to understand what to do next. After driving for almost an hour, he parked in front of a discreet hotel in South London, far from the district where they lived, far from anywhere Veronica could easily find them. They checked into a simple but clean and cozy room. Michael sat on the bed, still holding his drawing notebook against his chest, and Edward sat beside him. "I'm going to make everything right this time, Michael. I promise. I will never leave you alone again. Never again." Michael looked at his father, and for the first time in a long time a small trembling smile appeared on his lips. Daddy stayed. Edward gently held his son's hand, feeling the fragility of those small injured fingers. Daddy stayed, and he's not leaving anymore. That night, as Michael slept beside him, Edward stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that still needed to be done. He knew Veronica wouldn't give up easily. He knew she would try to manipulate the situation, turn the narrative in her favor, use every possible resource to protect herself. But Edward also knew he wouldn't allow that to happen. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond pain and emptiness. He felt purpose. He felt determination. He felt he had a real reason to fight. And while the city remained alive outside, with its sounds, its lights, and its secrets, inside that hotel room, father and son began to write a new chapter. A chapter still full of uncertainties, challenges, and scars that would take time to heal. But also a chapter that, for the first time in a long time, held hope. Edward picked up his phone and began searching for the number of his trusted lawyer. He needed help. He needed guidance. He needed to ensure Michael was legally protected, that Veronica could never come near him again. But before calling, he looked once more at his son sleeping beside him, his face finally peaceful, and felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had failed. He had failed miserably as a father. But now he had a chance to fix it, and he wouldn't waste it. Edward didn't sleep that night. He lay beside Michael, watching the boy's chest rise and fall with each breath, listening to every sigh, every movement. He was afraid to close his eyes and wake up to find that everything had been just an inverted nightmare, that he was still in Edinburgh, far away, absent while his son suffered alone. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. Painfully real. When the sun began to rise, Edward carefully got up so as not to wake Michael and went to the hotel room window. Outside, London was also starting to wake up. Traffic increased, people hurried along the sidewalks, life continued its frenetic pace as always. But for Edward, everything had changed. He was no longer the same man who had embarked for Edinburgh days ago. Something had broken within him, and at the same time something had awakened. He picked up his phone and dialed the number of Augustus Finch, his lawyer for over 15 years. Augustus was a serious, competent, discreet man. He had helped Edward with complex negotiations, billion-dollar contracts, and delicate corporate matters, but never with anything like this, never with anything so personal, so painful. Augustus answered on the third ring, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Edward? What time is it? Are you all right?" Edward looked at the clock. 6:15 in the morning. "Augustus, I need you. Now, it's urgent." Edward's tone of voice made the lawyer fully wake up. "What happened? Are you in danger?" "It's not me, it's Michael. I need you to come to the hotel where I am. I'll send you the address. And bring someone trustworthy from social services. A person who understands cases involving children, who can assess my son's situation." Augustus was silent for a few seconds, processing. "Edward, what happened to Michael?" Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the words he needed to say. The woman who was taking care of him, she wasn't taking care of him. She was hurting him, Augustus, in every possible way, and I wasn't there to notice. Augustus's voice became graver, more serious. "I understand. I'll gather the team and be there in 2 hours. Don't do anything else until I arrive. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer strange calls. Just stay with Michael and wait." Edward thanked him and hung up. He went back to the bed and sat in an armchair beside it, watching his son. Michael was still asleep, but it wasn't a peaceful sleep. He stirred, mumbled unintelligible things, furrowed his brow as if having a bad dream. Edward wanted to wake him, to pull him out of that invisible nightmare, but he knew the boy needed to rest. 2 hours later, there was a knock at the door. Edward opened it and found Augustus accompanied by 2 people. The first was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair pulled back in a discreet bun, thin-rimmed glasses and a serene expression. She introduced herself as Dr. Sonia Thompson, a social worker specializing in child vulnerability cases. The second person was a younger man, around 35, with a discreet appearance and an attentive gaze. He introduced himself as Marcus Reed, a private investigator who frequently worked with Augustus on delicate cases. They entered the room, and Michael woke up with the movement. Seeing strangers, the boy curled up in bed, hugging his knees and looking at his father with fear. Edward approached and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's all right, Michael. These people are here to help us. You don't need to be afraid." Dr. Sonia Thompson approached slowly, knelt in front of the bed, and smiled gently. "Hi, Michael. My name is Sonia. I work helping children stay safe and happy. I just want to talk with you. For a little bit, okay? You don't need to be afraid. You can say whatever you want, however you want." Michael looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. Then the boy looked back at the woman and gave a small nod. Edward, Augustus, and Marcus left the room to give them privacy for the conversation. They stood in the hotel corridor, talking in low voices. Augustus crossed his arms, his expression serious. "Tell me everything from the beginning. Don't omit any details," Edward told him. He told about the unexpected return trip, about the silence in the house, about the scene in the attic, about Michael hanging from the window, about Veronica observing with coldness. He told about the boy's revelations, about the punishments, about the manipulation. Every word was difficult to say, but he forced himself to tell everything. When he finished, Augustus let out a long sigh. "This is serious, Edward, very serious. Veronica might try to reverse the situation, claim she's being wronged, invent stories. We need concrete evidence. Marcus, you'll need to investigate everything about her. History, previous references, records, anything that can give us an advantage." Marcus nodded, already writing everything down in a small notebook. "I'll start today. I'll need access to the house if possible, and permission to check security cameras if there are any." Edward frowned. "Security cameras? I have external cameras at the mansion to monitor the perimeter, but I never thought to check the recordings. Could it be that—" Marcus interrupted him with a discreet smile. "If the cameras are active and have cloud backup, we might have records of everything. I'll need the access credentials." Edward immediately took out his phone and sent the credentials to Marcus. The possibility of having concrete evidence of what had happened ignited a flame of hope within him. After almost an hour, Dr. Sonia Thompson came out of the room. Her expression was different, more serious, more concerned. She closed the door carefully and looked at Edward. "We need to talk." They went to a cafe on the ground floor of the hotel and sat at a secluded table. Dr. Sonia Thompson opened a folder and began to leaf through notes. "Edward, what Michael told me is consistent, detailed, and extremely concerning. He exhibits classic signs of severe psychological trauma, hypervigilance, constant fear, difficulty trusting adults, intense emotional responses. Furthermore, there are evident physical signs of neglect. He is underweight for his age, has old marks of injuries, nails bitten to the quick. This is not the result of a week or two, this is chronic." Edward felt guilt tighten his chest again. "I should have noticed. I should have been present." Dr. Sonia Thompson placed her hand gently over his. "Edward, you are not to blame here. The blame lies with whoever hurt the child. Now you are doing what needs to be done, protecting your son. But I need you to understand that this will be a long process. Michael will. I need psychological support, a stable routine, emotional security, and you will need support too." Edward nodded, trying to absorb everything. Augustus leaned forward, his voice firm. "We will file for a full protection order. We will request that temporary custody be granted to you, with a total restriction of contact between Veronica and Michael. We will gather all possible evidence and present it to the judge. If we find sufficient evidence, we can also initiate criminal proceedings." Marcus, who was listening in silence, raised his phone. "Edward, I've gained access to the cameras. I'll start reviewing the recordings now. If there's anything relevant, I'll let you know immediately." They spent the rest of the day at the hotel, organizing strategies, gathering documents, preparing everything for the hearing that Augustus managed to schedule for the next day, using contacts and the urgency of the case. Edward stayed by Michael's side the entire time, trying to comfort him, trying to make the boy understand that he was safe now. But while they were organizing, Veronica wasn't idle either. That same afternoon, she appeared on a popular London radio show with red eyes, a choked voice, and a well-rehearsed speech. She spoke about how she had dedicated years of her life to caring for Michael, how she had been treated with contempt by Edward, how she had been expelled from the house without reason. She invented stories about how difficult the boy was, about how Edward was an absent and aggressive father, about how she had tried to do her best in an impossible situation. The interview went viral. Within hours, Edward Alistair's name was trending on social media. People who didn't know the truth began to form opinions, to judge, to condemn. Veronica, with well-placed tears and a convincing narrative, painted herself as a victim of a powerful man who wanted to destroy her, to hide his own mistakes. Augustus called Edward as soon as he saw the repercussions. "She anticipated us. She's trying to control the narrative before we can present the truth. This will make things difficult, but it won't change the facts. We need to be strategic. Don't respond to anything publicly. Let justice speak for you." Edward hung up the phone and looked at Michael, who was sitting on the bed, drawing in silence. The boy didn't know what was happening outside, and Edward wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to protect him from all the filth, all the lies, all the circus Veronica was creating. That night, Marcus called. His voice was different, more urgent. "Edward, "I found something. You need to see this." Marcus sent an access link to a cloud folder. Edward opened it and saw a series of videos organized by date. He began to watch, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The recordings showed everything. They showed Veronica dragging Michael by the arm up the stairs. They showed her locking the boy in his room and ignoring his cries. They showed her serving minuscule meals and throwing the rest of the food away while Michael watched hungrily. They showed the day she forced him to the attic window, made him hang, watched coldly as he cried and pleaded until Edward arrived and saved him. The images were brutal, undeniable, the raw naked truth captured in pixels and seconds. Edward closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. That was difficult to watch, but it was necessary. It was the proof they needed. "Marcus, this is enough, more than enough." Augustus was already organizing everything to present to the judge at the next day's hearing. He knew those images would completely change the course of the case. The next morning, Edward and Michael went to the courthouse accompanied by Augustus and Dr. Sonia Thompson. The courtroom was full. Journalists, onlookers, lawyers. Veronica was sitting on the other side, accompanied by a lawyer she had hired in a hurry. She looked at Edward with a mixture of hatred and despair. The judge entered, everyone stood up, and the hearing began. Augustus presented the case objectively, in detail, without resorting to unnecessary emotionalism. He presented Dr. Sonia Thompson's reports, the medical records, showing Michael's malnutrition, the testimonies of former mansion staff who had noticed changes in the boy's behavior, and then he presented the videos. The room fell into absolute silence as the images were displayed. Veronica tried to maintain her composure, but as the videos progressed, her mask began to crack. She tried to argue, tried to claim that everything was out of context, that the images didn't show the complete story, but the judge silenced her with a firm gesture. When the videos ended, the judge looked directly at Veronica. "I have seen enough. These images are undeniable. What was done to this child has no justification, no context that can mitigate it. This is abuse, this is cruelty." He turned to Edward. "Temporary custody is granted to you, with a total restriction of contact between Ms. Veronica Benson and the child. I am referring this case for criminal investigation. The hearing is adjourned." Veronica tried to stand up, tried to protest, but her lawyer held her arm, knowing that any attempt at argumentation would be futile. She left the room escorted, with her shoulders slumped, her arrogance destroyed, her mask completely shattered. Edward left the courthouse with Michael in, his arms shielding the boy's face from the cameras trying to capture images. Augustus walked beside him, clearing a path through the crowd of journalists shouting questions. As soon as they got into the car, Edward finally breathed a sigh of relief. The first battle had been won. But he knew the war was far from over. There was still much to be done. There were still scars to heal, trust to rebuild, an entire life to rewrite. But for the first time in a long time, Edward felt he was on the right path. He felt he was finally doing what he should have done from the beginning, being present, protecting, loving. The days following the hearing were a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Edward had secured temporary custody of Michael, but he knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful road. The victory in court didn't erase years of suffering, nor did it heal the invisible wounds the boy carried. And Edward, for the first time in a long time, was ready to face this reality head-on. They continued staying at the hotel for a few more days while Edward looked for a new place to live. He didn't want to go back to the mansion. That place was too tainted by bad memories, by heavy silences, by pain. Michael needed a real fresh start, and so did Edward. They needed a space that was theirs, that was safe, that was a true home. With the help of a trusted real estate agent, Edward found a smaller house in a quiet West London neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have 3 floors or a huge pool. It was a single-story house with 3 bedrooms, a bright garden, large windows that let the sun in, and a cozy feeling the mansion never had. When Edward showed the photos to Michael, the boy looked in silence for a long time. Then he pointed to one of the bedrooms in the image. "Can this one be mine, Daddy?" Edward felt his heart clench. It was the first time in days that Michael had asked for something spontaneously, without fear, without hesitation. "It can be whatever you want, son. The whole house is ours. You choose." Michael smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but it was real. And for Edward, that was worth more than any millionaire contract he had ever signed. The move happened the following week. Edward hired a team to clean and prepare the house before they brought in their belongings. He bought new furniture, hired an interior designer to help create a space that was cheerful, light, and welcoming. Michael participated in everything. He chose the color of his bedroom walls, chose the sheets, chose where he wanted to put his desk. Edward made sure to ask for his son's opinion on every detail, wanting him to feel part of it, to know that this space was truly his. On the day they finally moved in, Michael walked into the new house and stood in the living room looking around with wide eyes. Edward placed a hand on his shoulder. "What do you think?" Michael looked at his father, and for the first time in a long time, spoke with a firmer voice. "It's beautiful here, Daddy. It has light." Edward knelt in front of his son and gently held his hands. "There will always be light, Michael. I promise." They spent the rest of the day tidying up, organizing the rooms, hanging pictures on the walls. Edward had decided to work from home indefinitely. He cancelled all international trips, delegated projects to his trusted team, reorganized his entire routine to be present. For the first time in years, he put his son first. And this decision, however difficult it was from a professional standpoint, brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. But Michael's recovery was not linear. There were good days, when he seemed more relaxed, more at ease, more willing to talk and play. And there were bad days when he woke up with nightmares, refused food, remained in absolute silence, staring into nothingness. Edward learned to respect these moments, not to force anything, to simply be present. Dr. Sonia Thompson continued to follow the case closely. She visited the house every week, talked with Michael, assessed his progress, and guided Edward on how to handle difficult situations. It was she who recommended that Michael begin therapy with a child psychologist specializing in trauma. The psychologist was named Dr. Marianne Carter, a young woman with a calm voice and gentle eyes. She received Michael in a colorful office full of toys, books, and art supplies. In the first sessions, Michael barely spoke. He sat in silence, drawing or assembling puzzles. Marianne didn't force him. She just stayed nearby, offering her presence, creating a safe space. Gradually, Michael began to open up. He started talking about the fear, about the nights he was locked in his room, about the hunger he felt, about the times Veronica said he was a burden, an inconvenience, someone no one truly wanted. Each revelation was a stab to Edward's heart, who waited outside the office, trying to maintain his composure. Marianne explained that the process would be long, that Michael would need to relearn to trust, to feel safe, to understand that what happened to him wasn't his fault, that it would take months, perhaps years, for the wounds to truly begin to heal. But she also said something that gave Edward hope. Children are resilient. With support, love, and stability, they can recover from profound traumas. Edward dedicated himself completely to being that support. He created a solid routine for Michael. Breakfast together every morning, lunch always at the same time, afternoons reserved for activities the boy enjoyed, family dinners, bedtime stories. He learned to cook dishes Michael liked, learned to play again, learned to listen without judging, to comfort without minimizing. In the afternoons they did activities together. Sometimes they went to the park where Michael ran and played with other children, always under his father's watchful eye. Sometimes they stayed home, assembling puzzles or watching movies. Edward bought paints and brushes, and Michael spent hours painting, creating colorful worlds on paper, expressing feelings he couldn't yet put into words. One day, while painting, Michael stopped and looked at his father. "Daddy, is Veronica coming back?" Edward felt his stomach clench. This question had been asked before, many times, and he always answered with the truth. "No, son, she's not coming back. The judge said she can't come near you, and I'm going to do everything to ensure it stays that way." Michael looked at the drawing he was making. It was a house with large windows, a garden, a bright sun in the sky, and two figures holding hands in front of the house. I'm scared she'll show up at night, that she'll take me back. Edward knelt beside his son and held his hand. She won't take you, Michael. I'm here. I will always protect you. You are safe now. Michael nodded, but Edward could see that the fear was still there, rooted, resilient. He knew it would take time for the boy to truly believe he was safe. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Veronica advanced. Augustus kept Edward updated on each step. Investigations revealed that Veronica had a problematic history. She had worked for other families before, and some of them reported strange behaviors, though nothing as serious as what she had done to Michael. There were indications of manipulation, lies, attempts to control narratives. All of this strengthened the case. Veronica, in turn, tried to defend herself. She hired more experienced lawyers, tried to discredit the evidence, claimed the videos were fabricated, that it was all a setup by Edward to destroy her. But the evidence was too solid. The medical reports, the testimonies, the videos, everything pointed to the same conclusion. She had committed serious acts against a vulnerable child. The media coverage of the case continued. Newspapers and news portals covered every development. Some people still defended Veronica, claiming she was being persecuted by a rich and powerful man. But most, upon seeing the evidence, came to understand the gravity of what had happened. Edward avoided reading the news. He didn't want to feed the anger. He didn't want to get lost in public debates. His focus was on Michael, on building a new life, on healing what had been broken. But there were moments when guilt still consumed him. Moments when he wondered how he had been so blind, so absent, so negligent. How had he let his son suffer for so long without realizing it? How had he trusted someone without truly knowing them? How had he fled from the pain of losing Helen to the point of abandoning his son? In one of the sessions with Dr. Sonia, "Thompson," Edward broke down. He spoke about the guilt he carried, about the overwhelming weight of knowing he had failed as a father. Sonia listened in silence, and when he finished, she spoke firmly. "Edward, you are not to blame for what Veronica did. She is an adult, fully capable of choosing her actions. You trusted the wrong person, yes. You were absent, yes. But you didn't hurt your son. She hurt him, and now you are doing what needs to be done. Taking responsibility, changing, being present. That is what matters." Sonia's words didn't completely erase the guilt, but they helped Edward carry it in a less destructive way. He learned to transform guilt into action, into a commitment to be better, to be present, to never let something like this happen again. As the weeks passed, Edward began to notice subtle changes in Michael. The boy smiled more, laughed at silly things, asked for dessert, asked questions about everything. He wanted to know how things worked, he wanted to learn, he wanted to explore the world around him. It was as if he was rediscovering the childhood that had been stolen from him. One day, Michael came home from school with a drawing he had made in art class. It was a family portrait. He had drawn himself larger and more colorful than before, next to his father, both smiling. And in the corner of the paper, he had drawn a long-haired woman with wings floating above them. Edward looked at the drawing and felt tears well up. "Who is that, son?" Michael looked at the drawing with seriousness. "It's Mommy. She's protecting us from above." Edward hugged his son, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because Helen wasn't there to see the boy grow up, to help him through this difficult time. Gratitude because Michael still remembered her with love, still felt her presence in some way. That night, as he put Michael to bed, Edward lay beside him and began to tell stories about Helen. Stories he had avoided telling for years out of fear of the pain. But now he understood that it was important to keep her memory alive, that Michael had the right to know his mother, to know who she was, to carry her love with him. Michael listened in silence, his eyes shining, absorbing every word. And when Edward finished, the boy asked, "Do you think Mommy is proud of me, Daddy?" Edward held his son's hand tightly. "I'm sure she is, Michael. She's very proud, and so am I." Michael smiled and closed his eyes, finally relaxing completely. Edward stayed there, watching his son sleep. feeling that despite all the suffering, despite all the failures, they were building something new, something true, something worthwhile. And for the first time in years, Edward felt he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 months had passed since the day Edward rescued Michael from that window. 3 months that felt like a lifetime. Such was the transformation that occurred. The new house already smelled like home. The walls were decorated with Michael's drawings, family photos, new memories being built day after day. The garden, which was once just mowed grass, now had flower beds that father and son planted together, watering every afternoon, watching the plants grow just as they themselves were growing. Michael was different. He still had occasional nightmares, still had moments of silence when he retreated into himself, but the frequency decreased. He was gaining weight healthily, his cheeks regained their color, his eyes recovered their sparkle. He returned to school regularly, and the teachers noticed significant changes. He participated in classes, made friends, smiled during recess. The educational coordinator called Edward a few times, emotional, reporting the boy's progress. Edward was also different. He had dark circles under his eyes, yes, because he slept less to be present for all his son's important moments. He had white hairs that weren't there before, because the tension of the last few months had taken its toll. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Purpose, presence, peace. He had found something that money never bought, a true connection with his son. Therapy with Dr. Marianne Carter continued, and the progress was visible. Michael began to talk about the trauma more openly, not with paralyzing pain, but with the understanding that it had happened, but didn't define who he was. Marianne taught breathing techniques for when fear returned, taught ways to express feelings through art, created a safe space where Michael could be completely himself. Edward participated in some sessions, learning how to best support his son. He learned to identify triggers, to offer comfort without overprotecting, to balance security with freedom. He learned that being a father wasn't about being perfect, but about being present, about trying, about growing together. Meanwhile, the legal process reached its climax. Augustus called one July morning, his voice firm and controlled. "Edward, the final hearing has been scheduled. It will be next week, Thursday. The judge will make the definitive decision on custody and on the accusations against Veronica. You need to be prepared for everything." Edward felt his stomach clench. He knew that moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "Does Michael need to go?" Augustus hesitated. "Technically, it's not mandatory, but the judge might want to hear from him depending on how things unfold. We'll assess it at the time. The important thing is for you to be there, firm, calm. We have all the evidence, all the testimonies. There's no way the judge can decide differently." Edward thanked him and hung up. He looked at Michael, who was in the garden playing with a puppy they had adopted weeks ago, a small, playful, mixed breed that had become the boy's best friend. He didn't want Michael to go back to that court environment, that tension, those bad memories, but he knew it might be necessary. He talked with Dr. Marianne Carter, who recommended preparing him emotionally if necessary. That night, Edward sat with Michael in the living room, with the puppy lying at their feet, and explained carefully. "Michael, next week there's going to be an important meeting with the judge. It's to decide that you'll stay with me forever, and to decide what will happen to Veronica. He might want to talk to you, but I'll be right by your side the whole time. You don't need to be afraid, okay?" Michael looked at his father and for the first time showed no panic. He just nodded seriously. "I want to stay with you, Daddy, forever." Edward hugged his son, feeling a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. "And you will stay, son, I promise." The week passed slowly, each day laden with expectation. Finally, Thursday arrived. Edward wore a sober suit, dressed Michael in comfortable clothes, and they went to the courthouse accompanied by Augustus and Dr. Sonia Thompson. Marianne also went, in case Michael needed emotional support. The courtroom was emptier this time. Fewer journalists, fewer onlookers. Just the involved parties, the lawyers, some witnesses. Veronica was sitting. On the other side, visibly different. She had lost weight. Her posture was no longer so haughty, her eyes were tired. She looked at Michael for a brief moment, but the boy averted his gaze and clung to his father's arm. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The hearing began with the reading of the case, the review of the evidence presented, the testimonies that had been collected over the months. Augustus made a clear and objective presentation, reinforcing the seriousness of the acts committed, the harm caused to the child, and the need for full protection. Veronica's lawyer tried to argue, claiming she had acted under extreme stress, that she never intended to cause real harm, that she deserved a second chance. But the words sounded hollow in the face of the evidence. The videos were reviewed again, medical reports were presented, and testimonies from teachers and staff reinforced the pattern of abusive behavior. Then the judge asked to speak with Michael. Edward felt his heart race, but Marianne approached and whispered words of encouragement to the boy. Michael stood up, his legs trembling slightly, but walked to the front with a courage Edward didn't know he possessed. The judge knelt down to be at Michael's height and spoke in a gentle voice. "Michael, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. You can answer truthfully, without fear. No one here will hurt you, okay?" Michael nodded. "Do you feel safe with your father?" "Yes," Michael replied firmly. "Do you want to continue living with him?" "Yes. I want to stay with Daddy. Forever." The judge nodded and asked a few more questions, all answered by Michael with surprising clarity. He spoke about the new house, about school, about the dog, about afternoons in the garden. He spoke about how he felt loved, protected, happy. When he finished, Michael returned to Edward's side, who hugged him tightly, proud of his son's courage. The judge stood up and looked at everyone in the room. Then he began to speak, his voice grave and solemn. In light of all the evidence presented, the testimonies collected, the child's psychological evaluation, and the undeniable visual evidence, it is clear that there was severe neglect, psychological abuse, and deliberate placement of the child in a dangerous situation. Ms. Veronica Benson acted consciously and cruelly, violating the trust placed in her and causing profound harm to a vulnerable child. He paused, looking directly at Veronica, who kept her head down. "Therefore, I rule for definitive and full custody in favor of the father, Edward Alistair. Any type of contact, direct or indirect, between Miss Veronica Benson and the child Michael Alistair is prohibited. Furthermore, I refer the case to the Public Prosecutor's Office for appropriate criminal measures to be taken." Hearing adjourned. The room fell into silence for some seconds. Then Edward felt tears stream down his face. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief, gratitude, and victory. He hugged Michael, who also began to cry, but these were tears of liberation. Veronica left the room escorted, without looking back. Her story was written. Her choices had consequences, and now she would have to face them. Edward, Michael, Augustus, Sonia, and Marianne left the courthouse together. Outside, the sun shone brightly, the sky was clear, and there was a feeling of a fresh start in the air. Augustus placed a hand on Edward's shoulder. "It's over. He's yours. Officially, legally, definitively." Edward looked at his son, who was smiling for the first time in weeks, a wide, genuine smile, full of hope. "Thank you, Augustus. Thank you for everything." In the following days, news of the decision spread. Veronica faced the public consequences of her actions. She lost her reputation, lost social connections, was removed from all charitable organizations where she participated. The criminal proceedings took their course, and she would face justice for the crimes committed. But Edward didn't worry about that. His focus was on building, not destroying. It was on looking forward, not backward. With definitive custody secured, Edward began to plan the future with more peace of mind. He completely reorganized his career, sold stakes in international projects, delegated responsibilities, and created a structure that allowed him to work from home most of the time. He would no longer sacrifice his presence in his son's life for anything. Michael continued to flourish. He turned 8, and Edward organized a party at their new house with school friends, a colorful cake, games in the garden, and laughter that filled every corner. Seeing his son surrounded by people who loved him, seeing him happy, free, safe, was the best gift Edward could receive. During the party, Michael approached his father, hugged him tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saving me, Daddy." Edward felt his heart clench. He hugged his son back and replied, "Thank you for giving me the chance to be the father you deserve." The following months brought even more positive changes. Michael started playing sports, joined a school football team, and discovered he loved to run. Edward went to all the games, cheered from the stands, celebrated every goal as if it were a championship final. There was something special about seeing his son interacting with other children, laughing freely, without the weight of fear on his back. Other parents at the school began to greet Edward, to include him in conversations, and he realized that he was building not only a new life for Michael, but also for himself. They created rituals that became sacred: breakfast together every day, conversations before bedtime, Sunday outings, movie nights every Friday. Small things that built a solid foundation, that said without words that they were a family, that they were together, that nothing would separate them again. Edward also began attending a support group for parents who had experienced traumatic situations with their children. At first, it was difficult to talk about everything that had happened, to admit his own failures in front of strangers. But gradually he realized that sharing the story was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Hearing other stories, realizing he wasn't alone on this journey of rebuilding, brought unexpected comfort. In one of these group meetings, Edward met Beatrice, a 40-year-old woman who had gone through something similar with her teenage daughter. She had managed to rebuild her life after discovering that the girl was being neglected by her nanny. Beatrice shared something that stuck in Edward's mind. Guilt is a constant companion, but it cannot be the only voice you hear. Transform it into fuel to do better, not into chains that bind you to the past. These words echoed in Edward for days. He began to forgive himself more deeply, not erasing what had happened, but accepting that he was human, that he had made mistakes, and that now he was doing everything differently. This acceptance brought a lightness he hadn't expected to feel so soon. Michael also began to make surprising progress at school. His English teacher, Mrs. Claudia, called Edward one September afternoon, emotional. Michael had written an essay about what it meant to have a home, and the boy's words were so mature, so profound, that she asked permission to share it with the class. Edward authorized it, and when he read the essay that night, he cried. Michael wrote about how home wasn't a physical place, but a feeling of security, belonging, and love. He wrote about how he had learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. Therapy continued, but with less frequency. Marianne explained that Michael was in a healthy recovery process, that the scars were still there but were healing. She recommended that they continue sporadic follow-ups, but that a stable routine and constant love were the best remedies. Edward also realized that he needed to take care of himself to properly care for Michael. He began individual therapy, something he had never considered before. In sessions with Dr. Robert, a psychologist specializing in grief and parenthood, Edward finally allowed himself to speak deeply about Helen. He spoke about the pain of loss, about how he had fled from that pain by throwing himself into work, about the fear he felt of not being enough for his son alone. Dr. Robert helped him understand that grief had no expiration date, that it was possible to honor Helen's memory and still move forward, build a new life. It was during these sessions that Edward made an important decision. He wanted Michael to know more about his mother, not just through scattered stories, but consistently and lovingly. He began to organize photo albums, gathering images of Helen from her youth to the last days before the accident. There were photos of her pregnant, radiant, with her hands on her belly. Photos of her holding newborn Michael, with that look of absolute love that only mothers have. Photos of the family together, happy, complete. One night, Edward called Michael to sit on the sofa and opened the first album. The boy looked at the images with curiosity, delicately touching each photograph as if they were fragile treasures. "That's Mommy when she was young before she met me," Edward explained, pointing to a photo of Helen at 20, her hair blowing in the wind, smiling at the camera on a beach. She loved the sea. She used to say that the waves brought peace to the soul. Michael stared at the image. "She was beautiful, Daddy." She was. And not just on the outside. She had a huge heart. She helped everyone who needed it. When you were born, she said she had found the meaning of her life. You were everything to her, Michael." The boy continued flipping through the album, asking questions about each photo, wanting to know details, stories, memories. Edward answered everything with patience and love, realizing that this moment was important not only for Michael, but for him too. It was a way to keep Helen alive in both their hearts, to ensure she would always be part of the family, even if no longer physically present. In the following months, Edward created new rituals in Helen's memory. On her birthday, they visited her favorite place in London, Hyde Park, and had a picnic under the trees, telling funny stories about her. On Mother's Day, Michael made a special drawing and they hung it on the living room wall next to the family photos. Edward realized that honoring Helen's memory didn't mean being stuck in the past, but rather integrating the love she had left into the new life they were building. Michael also started to show interest in music, something he had inherited from his mother. Helen played the guitar and sang to her son when he was a baby. Edward had never thought of encouraging this artistic side of the boy, but when he noticed the interest, he enrolled Michael in guitar lessons. The teacher, Mr. Anthony, was a retired 60-year-old musician, patient and kind. He saw potential in Michael from the very first lesson. "This boy has natural talent, Edward, and more than that, he has sensitivity. Music can be a wonderful way for him to express what he feels." And that's exactly what happened. Michael dedicated himself to the guitar with passion. He practiced every day, his small fingers struggling to form chords but persisting with determination. Edward listened from the next room, moved by his son's progress. Sometimes when Michael played a softer song, Edward would close his eyes and could almost feel Helen's presence there, smiling, proud. Edward's social life also began to flourish in unexpected ways. He started accepting invitations from friends he had neglected for years. Dinners, casual gatherings, conversations that didn't just revolve around business. He took Michael when appropriate, and the boy gradually got used to being in social environments, interacting with adults without fear, trusting that not everyone posed a danger. In one of these gatherings, Edward reconnected with Julia, an old college friend who had also lost her spouse years ago and was raising 2 children alone. They talked at length about the challenges of single parenthood, about the weight of responsibility, about the beauty of watching children grow despite adversity. Julia became a close friend, someone Edward could confide in without judgment, someone who understood the complexity of rebuilding a life after loss. Julia's children, Laura and Peter, were close in age to Michael, and soon the three became inseparable. They went on outings together on weekends, went to the cinema, to the park, organized board game afternoons. Edward happily watched Michael laughing with his friends, just being a child, without the weight he had carried for so long. One October afternoon, Michael came home from school with a note from his teacher, asking Edward to attend a meeting. His heart immediately clenched, fearing something was wrong. But when he arrived at the school the next day, the teacher greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Edward, I called you here to give you some good news. Michael is among the best students in the class, not just in grades, but in participation, creativity, and how he helps his classmates. He has completely transformed since the beginning of the year. I don't know what you've been doing, but you're doing it right." Edward felt his eyes fill with tears. He thanked the teacher and left the school with a heart overflowing with pride and gratitude. That child who months ago was broken, scared, lost, was now flourishing in ways he never imagined possible. A year after that fateful day in the attic, Edward and Michael were sitting in the garden of their new house, watching the flowers they had planted together bloom. The dog ran among the flower beds, Michael laughed, and Edward felt a profound peace. Michael stopped playing and sat beside his father. "Daddy, I still remember that day, the day you pulled me in from the window." Edward looked at his son, ready to comfort him if the memory brought pain, but Michael continued, his voice calm. "I thought I was going to fall. I thought no one would save me. But you came. And since that day, everything changed. I'm still scared sometimes, but it's not like before, because I know you're here." Edward hugged his son, feeling tears well up again. "And I always will be, Michael. Always." They stayed there, embraced as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. And in that moment, Edward understood something profound. He had lost years being absent, fleeing from pain, hiding in work. But now he had found something much greater. He had found the courage to be present, to face his own failures, to rebuild what had been broken. Their story wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still difficult days, still scars. That would take time to heal. But it was a story of love, resilience, and second chances. It was a story of a father who learned to be a true father and a son who learned to trust again. And as night fell over London, inside that illuminated house, full of laughter and hope, Edward and Michael continued writing the next chapters of their lives, chapters that would be marked not by what they had lost, but by what they had built together. The past could not be erased. Bad memories didn't disappear completely, but they could be transformed. They could be covered by new, happy memories full of love, and that was exactly what they were doing day after day, choice after choice, hug after hug. Michael would grow up. He would have his own dreams, his own challenges, his own journey. But he would grow up knowing he was loved, protected, that he had a father who would never abandon him again. And Edward would live each day with the certainty that he had made the right choice, that he had put what truly mattered first, that he had saved not only his son that day in the attic, but had saved himself too. Because in the end, love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It was about trying, failing, learning, growing. It was about never giving up, even when everything seemed lost. It was about holding the hand of the one you love and walking together no matter the path. And they were walking together now. Father and son. Family. Home. Forever. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Edward and Michael's story has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of rebuilding love and second chances, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense and true stories like this, which make us reflect on the most human side of the soul, on the strength that exists within each of us to overcome the impossible, and on the transformative power of true love. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions. Until then, take care and cherish those you love.